In this video, you will find out the results based on the questionnaire that was asked of people who have a bachelor's degree. As opposed to the first group project, which was an open-ended questionnaire, for this project, we had to study a closed-end questionnaire based on questions that were already set. The purpose of this questionnaire was to find out how the economy plays an important role in people's lives. The economy affects things from employment status and opportunity and earnings potential all the way to our overall personal wealth. Because of the severity that the economy plays in our everyday lives, we will focus on the economy and consumer spending. Consumer spending and the economy. Consumers' perceptions drive their spending habits. Consumer spending carried 70% of GDP in 2013 alone. The highest consumer spending pattern tends to be during the holiday season, which runs between Thanksgiving and early weeks of January. This tends to be the time when consumers spend the most amount. Our first hypothesis looked to prove that there would be a positive correlation between our study and respondents having a positive outlook of the economic environment and an increase in their spending on discretionary consumption items. Whether it be an increase in expected real income, total savings and assets, or improved outlook on work status, as the respondents' attitude of the proceedings increases positively, so will the respondents' plans on increasing personal discretionary spending also increase. Not only will consumer spending increase as their expectations of their economic situation increase, but they will also decrease their spending if their expectations of their economic situation decreases. For our second hypothesis, we stated that an economy is expected to increase or decrease based on and people will change their consumption habits accordingly. We chose this hypothesis because it seemed the most obvious. As U.S. citizens coming back from a recession, we know firsthand the effect the economy played on our spending habits. In recent years, we have become more cautious, spending less and saving more. Milton Friedman proposed that a person's consumption ought not depend on current income alone, but also on prospects of income in the future, and this is what our study turned out to prove, or looked to prove. The method. The overarching method used for the questionnaire is a closed-ended or structured format. We use this method to measure what influences play a stronger role in individuals' discretionary or personal spending. The influencing factors we examined are the individual's expected income, expected inflation, expected total savings and assets, and their assessment on what his or her close friends and relatives are spending, and their assessment on the security of retaining his or her current work position. Throughout the questionnaire, several different measurement scales were used for the questions assigned specifically for the purpose of the test. The first one used is the profile analysis, which is a semantic differential scale. The second is a constant sum scale, where the participants are asked to distribute 100 points that represent the importance of the influencing factors. The last two types fall under the single choice measurement scale. One is via agree-disagree scale, while the other provides a list of responses for the participant to choose from. The questionnaire was designed with personal, easy, non-threatening questions at the beginning, so it builds trust with respondents. The middle section of the questionnaire delves deeper into the purpose of the test. asking specific, purposeful questions that are more difficult but not threatening. Lastly, it concludes with personal, difficult questions that could potentially make the respondent feel threatened. These types of questions are left for the last part of the survey in order to allow trust and rapport to be built.
My name is Brooke and I will be discussing the results. So, for our hypothesis and our variables that we tested for our first hypothesis is the optimism scale, which is the dependent variable, and the income spent on personal consumption, which is the independent variable. And the optimism is the dependent variable because we are assuming that people's personal consumption is dependent on how optimistic they are in the state of the economic environment. And our independent variable is what we are trying to measure and see whether people are spending more or spending the same or spending less given how optimistic they are in the economic environment. So these are the descriptive statistics of our variables, and the mean of the percentage of household income spent on personal consumption was 1.5. And the next slide shows the graphs of both of our variables. The first one being the percentage of household income spent on personal consumption with a standard deviation of 0.841 and a total value of 185 subjects. So also the frequency and the optimism scale shows the mean of being 1.1 e to the negative 16, which is a really small number, so it's hard to calculate, but it has standard deviation of 1 with the same amount of subjects. Next, we calculated our confidence interval, and a 95% confidence interval for percentage of after-tax spent on consumption was used with the following calculation: x plus minus 1.96 times the standard error, and our mean was 1.51, and a standard error of 0.062. And our confidence interval was between 1.388 and 1.631. Next is our hypothesis testing, and the statistical test to apply to our hypothesis would be a paired sample t-test, and this was largely due to the fact that we want to know the relationship between two constructs that the same subject has answered, meaning that we want to know how optimistic a participant was in relation to how much he or she spends on personal consumption. So our null hypothesis was that there is no correlation between subjects spending on discretionary consumption in relationship to their outlook on the economic environment, and our research hypothesis being that there is a direct correlation between subjects spending on discretionary consumption in relation to their outlook on the economic environment. So after concluding that we wanted to use a paired samples t-test, our outcome are as following, and the percentage that participants spend on personal consumption was asked in the form of 4 categories during the questionnaire. So as it was entered into the pool of data, the following categories were for every participant. So the question asked what about personal consumption, and 1 was being less than 70%, 2 being 71 to 80%, 3 being 81 to 90%, and 4 being 91 to 100%. And the results show that a paired sample t-test revealed that the amount spent on personal consumption with a mean of 1.51 and a standard deviation of 0.841 has little to no increase compared to the level of optimism in the economic environment, which had a mean of 0.0000 with small decimals and a standard deviation of 1. And this was either due to sampling error within the questionnaire or actual decimal being too small for any significance. And so from the output of the paired sample t-test, we can accept the null hypothesis that there is no correlation between subject spending on discretionary consumption in relation to their outlook on the economic environment.
For our second hypothesis, our dependent variable would be consumer spending habits, because we want to know how the last 3 variables affect spending habits. The last 3 variables would be our independent variables, because these are a few of many factors that go into our economical state. For the second hypothesis, we decided to use the linear regression model. The reason why we chose the linear regression test was because this hypothesis was more of a forecast based on the information provided by the survey. We wanted to know whether or not consumer spending increased or decreased based on the ups and downs of the economy during that time. As you can tell from the picture, we chose the dependent variable to be the percent of your after-tax household income, and our predictors were the variables that could potentially affect the dependent variable. Linear regression procedure reveals that for an F of 0.212 and a total DF of 184, the significance level is 0.81. The significance level shows that the variables are likely to be unrelated. The discussion. Through our hypothesis, we tried to demonstrate how consumption is a crucial driver in the economy. This was done by trying to prove that there is a relationship between the amount of consumption that is done and the state of the economy. Our first hypothesis stated that there is a positive correlation between respondents having a positive outlook of the economic environment and an increase in their spending on discretionary consumption items. The data revealed that there is no correlation between the two variables. Although consumption stays the same and does not increase, there is no clear indication if there is a shift in the number of items that are purchased. Our second hypothesis stated that when an economy is expected to increase or decrease, people change their consumption habits accordingly. There was no evident correlation between consumer spending and the changes in the economy. Some of the problems we found with the questionnaire. The first problem is the fact that we were unable to prove our hypothesis can be due to a couple of factors. There wasn't a range in the type of consumers that were surveyed. Our survey focused mostly on consumers with a bachelor's degree, which made it a bit biased because the same scenario may not apply to those with a lower education that tend to have lower income. The second issue is that the survey tended to ask broad questions instead of specific ones. In our case, it would have been better to ask questions on what exactly it is that the consumers spend their income on, such as necessities or pleasure items. It would allow us to see where exactly the shift in consumer spending is occurring. We would suggest that researchers should focus on the correlation between consumer spending during the holiday and the economy. After reviewing our results, a key question that arose was how different is holiday spending compared to other times of the year? Do consumers still worry about the economy during the holiday, or does the state of the economy really have no impact on it? We feel that this is something that researchers could focus on to truly understand the impact consumers have on the economy.